Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Joey. Welcome to the Mental Breakdown, where we bring on different guests to discuss their life experiences within a high performing environment, but also how mental skills and mental skills training play a role within that environment. So today, I'm joined by my friend Captain Matthew Lehman. Currently, he is the assistant professor for military science with the Army ROTC program at the University of Utah, and formerly a company commander of the Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning in Georgia, which is where he and I met and got a chance to work with each other. But what we're going to talk about with him today is leadership. So he spent some time in a leadership role within the Army, and we're really going to discuss with him how he developed his own leadership style, but also from more broad perspective of what are some effective leadership qualities, but also where leaders tend to go wrong when they're leading others. So go ahead and take a listen. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment any questions that you have on the YouTube channel, and hopefully you learn something from this. So take a seat, sit back, relax, and hopefully you enjoy.
Okay, cool. Captain Lehman, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How's everything going, man?
Everything's good. I'm here in, Salt Lake City, Utah, which is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Never considered myself being here, but that's one of the perks of the Army is you do get to move and you do get to explore the country.
Where I thought you were from, like that
South
side of the
Dakota.
world, South Dakota, kind of
Yeah.
close, I guess.
And
Yeah.
so we really like Salt Lake because it's in the middle of South Dakota where my family is, and California
That's right.
where my wife's family is. So we can
That's right. Okay.
split off.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about that before you left.
Yep.
That was kind of a good in between
Exactly.
point.
And our
So,
1 year anniversary is coming up in 8 days. So
heck yeah.
so far so
Yeah.
good,
If you guys party with the family, make sure they come to you, though.
Yeah.
Since you're in the middle,
Home base, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one, thank you for doing this for me. I really appreciate it.
Of
You
course.
and I obviously got a chance to connect when you were company commander for Delta 311 over at Fort Benning.
Yeah.
And so I figure who better to talk to about leadership than you?
Well, it
I'm
means
sure
a
you've
lot.
had, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience, not just within the Army, right? Even here with the RTC program at University of Utah, but probably outside of that, being a family man, being a friend. Like I'm sure there is growing up where you learned about leadership. So we're gonna dive into that for a little bit. But this going through the Master Resilience course at Fort Benning, the importance of like practicing gratitude on a consistent basis. Just helps with, not just dealing with depressive like symptoms, but I think overall just like enhancing every day a little bit more. There's a lot of bad in the world, but if we can find some of the good things that happen, it might make those bad things a little bit more manageable. So to start off, like what's one thing that you are grateful for?
Yeah. I was thinking about that, and I really am grateful, I would say, for the support of my family, right? When I started, it was just my family being my parents. Now it's my wife, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to lean on them on good days and bad days, on like successes and failures, knowing that I can have a bad day at work or whatever and come home and it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And the support of my family is something that keeps me grounded, and it's something that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, I was going to ask you why are you grateful for that? But you kind of answered it. Like I think just having that support system, no matter if things are going well or bad, like either way, they're still rocking
Exactly.
with you.
Good or bad, I can have a great day at work. I can have a bad day at work. It doesn't matter because I'm still coming home to my wife, and that's really cool.
And I got to imagine it makes, if you come home after like a good day, it makes the good day even better. Yeah. You come home after a bad day, it's like, oh, things don't seem that bad.
Yeah.
She'll
say, how was work? And I'll say, good. And she'll know, well, maybe it wasn't maybe that good, but it's okay.
She knows. Yeah, she knows. Yeah. Based on your response, you're like, it was good. Really? Was it good?
Let's talk about something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I guess I'm sure that now being closer to home.
Yeah.
For both of you all, like that just gets even better.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm grateful for the support of my family. That they accept me and they welcome me, good or bad. And that gives me a lot of self-confidence, which is really cool.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, it's always good to have family in your back corner too. Heck yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Before we really, well, to start off this topic about leadership,
Mhm.
obviously, yeah, you in the military for how long?
Coming up to 7 years.
Okay. So what made you go this route in the first place, getting into the military?
Yeah, so my dad, he was a field artillery officer, just like me.
Okay. Okay.
And growing up, I could see the impact that the Army had on him, right? He was very disciplined. To me, it was like, that's the kind of person I want to be. And I could see the Army's effect on him. And I
Hmm.
was like, I want that for myself.
Okay.
And so it was, my dad was a huge influence on me. Um, and I wanted to go down the road that he went down and in order to become someone that he is.
Okay. So if he was the same, right, like a field artillery officer, I gotta imagine like maybe that's kind of where leadership started for you. You got to see that from him.
Yeah. And even
What?
just his stories he'd tell me as a kid and just the way he was conscientious, on time, respecting others. That's something that I saw as valuable and important, and something he
Okay.
told me he learned from the Army.
Okay. Yeah. So let's continue that down that route. So like him being an officer, an infantry or some infantry, an artillery officer, and then you going down that same route. Like,
Mhm.
what did you see from him that made you wanna go that route, but also like what did you take from him in terms of like how you wanted to lead?
Yeah. So really, it's going to sound silly, but it's like the respect of respecting people is something that he was great at. Like he always went out of his way to really be nice to everyone, right? And I could see that, and I was like, that is how a good leader should be, right? It shouldn't be the guy that's always yelling. It shouldn't be the guy who's always the most aggressive. It should be
Hmm.
someone who sees the value in everybody. And I would say that's what my dad did and does to this day. He
Okay.
understands the value of people and he brings the best out of people.
Do you think there is a time, in your opinion, do you think there is a
Mm-hmm.
time when like you do need to be more aggressive? Obviously not
Yes,
physically, right? But like you need to be more assertive with people as opposed to just being nice to everybody.
absolutely. And I would say getting the most out of people, you have to understand what environments people will excel at. Some people
Mm,
excel in an aggressive environment. If you're like, hey, this is what I need from you. I need this, this, and this. And they are like, yes, sir, let's go. Right. They are the ones who need that, where other people are like, hey, let's talk about a plan. And they want to feel like their ideas are heard and valued and appreciated. And that gets them to say, yes, sir, let's go. Right.
yeah.
So you kind of have to understand and you have to read people with time. What does this person want? What does this person need? And how can I provide that as a leader?
Within your company,
Yep.
over back and forth bending, what did you have like about 120-ish?
Yeah. So the max class size was 160, but we usually probably had about 130.
I gotta imagine, like you just said, like being able to understand other people and like
Man,
mesh your leadership. So I gotta imagine that's not an easy task when you're working with 120, 130 plus people.
it is so hard. And it's funny because the XO over there, he said to one of the candidates, and I was sitting in that room, luckily, and the XO said something like, "Do you want to know how many leadership styles I have?" The candidate's like, "Sure," right? Doesn't really know how to respond.
Yeah,
And
yeah, sure, I guess. Why not?
yeah, right.
Can't
And
say
he said,
can't say no in that in
"Yeah,
that in that
exactly."
in that response.
And he
Yeah.
says, "It depends on how many soldiers I have." And I was like, "Wow." And I was glad I was sitting in the room for that.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes along the way of like, I can adapt and change in order to get the most out of my people. And that's how a leader should be. The my way or the highway doesn't always work like I had thought it would, back in the day. I
Yeah.
realized that a leader has to be flexible.
Yeah. And I think that's where you get into, because I think I've even done a workshop with your company about
Yes, sure did.
leadership styles,
Yep.
and talking about what makes bad leadership.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of goes right into it, being overly rigid in some senses.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's either this or you're screwed. You can get the heck out of here.
Yeah.
while that, like you said, that might work for some people, but I think in the overall scheme of things, like that can turn a lot of people off, and that's not.
Yep.
I think that's not what you want as a leader. That's not what you want your subordinates to be doing on a daily basis.
Right.
You know, were you a commander at that time when you heard the XO say that?
Yeah. And we
Okay.
were sitting there for a board review. We were literally sitting there having a review about whether this candidate is worthy of being a leader or not. And we had to kind of drill this candidate, see how bad do you want to be here, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of an intense environment, but every time I learned from that environment, I walked away going, this is what we do, this is why we do it, and this is what a leader is.
What else would you say is a part of your leadership style? Like I know
Yeah,
you talked about
so
like respecting people, being nice to everyone, like showing
yeah,
them the support. Like what else would you say falls under that?
I mean, biggest thing is emotional intelligence, and not only
Hmm.
being able to understand the emotions of my team, but being able to regulate my emotions, right?
Mm. Yeah.
To me, that's really huge. Um, and it's funny because the nickname they gave me was the machine, because I was always like I could regulate, right? I could understand what was happening, and I didn't go off the handle. And I tell you, I wasn't always like that. And the reason why I wanted to become an emotionally intelligent leader was because I was the opposite,
Mm.
even back in ROTC, and I saw
Okay.
that it didn't work, right? So
Okay.
my original attempt of, hey, flying off the handle or showing everyone how much I knew did not work.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, what's next, right? What's a
Yeah.
different avenue that I can go to be a better leader? Because this way isn't working. And emotional intelligence, being able to understand the emotions of my team, being able to manage them, but also being able to regulate my own emotions, has really been successful for me.
So you weren't able to regulate your emotions very well, like as
No,
you were
I
going
didn't
through the
understand the
ranks.
importance of it, and I didn't
Yeah.
practice it. And I paid the price for it. And
Yeah.
so through training and through understanding and self-development, I wanted to be able to regulate myself better, and as an extension, be able to regulate my team.
Yeah. How did you? I mean, it's key that you understood that like early on in the stages,
Mhm.
right? Like, hey, this isn't working. What else
Yep.
can I do? How did you go about developing that emotional intelligence?
That's a great question. So it's been a lifelong development process. The biggest thing was back when I was in ROTC and I realized the need for change, the first step I took was, okay, how do I develop my own competence
Hmm.
myself to be more confident in my abilities, right? So that's when I became a subject matter expert on these things, and that gave me the internal peace and like the self-confidence, right, to then be able to welcome in other ideas, talk to people who maybe didn't think differently than I. So first step was increase my preparedness, increase my
Hmm.
confidence, right?
Yeah.
Then when I was in OCS, I understood kind of the importance of being able to listen to all these ideas from all these people, right, but providing a single direction of travel, right? I call that the vision, right?
Hmm.
So you've got to create one vision, and you can take advice and you can take, comments and whatever, as long as it's supporting the vision, great, throw it on, right? And then the next step for me was, how do I handle conflict in a healthy way, right? And here at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, I
Hmm.
just became a certified mediator. So I
Yeah.
went
You,
through
you mentioned that. Yeah.
40 hour, yeah, I went through a 40-hour training of how can you mediate conflict. So I'm still learning, right? And but it's been a deliberate process, but it's also been a slow process.
Yeah. Why do you think that's important for a leader to like continue to learn? Because I think sometimes like you see people when they get into that leadership role, like they've, I don't want to say reached the top, right? But they
Yep.
get in that authoritative role and they're like, okay, I'm good now.
Yep.
Uh, so what leads you to like keep learning, or why is that
Yeah.
important as a leader?
So biggest thing to me is learning keeps you humble, right? I think the biggest mistake that leaders can make is when they are no longer humble,
Hmm.
because they no longer admit when they don't know something. And that leads to really, it leads to lack of trust from your team, right? If you are not willing to say, hey, that's a really good question, I do not know the answer to that. That takes some humility, right?
Yep.
And you have to kind of have that lifelong learner mentality. And if you don't, if you pretend like you know everything, people know that's not true, and you lose the respect and trust of your team. So being a lifelong learner keeps you humble.
And that's what I think I learned, that working specifically with the military is like, if you don't know something, they'll respect you more if you just say, hey, I don't know, but let me go find the answer at least, you know?
Yeah.
I've always been told the Army has a high bullshit meter. You know, they're going to be able to detect if you're lying or not. So let's not go down that route, you know? Yeah. So I think, and I never really, like, I would never view that as like a part of my leadership style. I do now. But I think, just there is something to, because you're still being vulnerable in that state with whoever you're with, right? It's like, hey, I actually don't know the answer.
Yeah,
that might throw off a lot of people. You know, they're like, oh,
yeah. But if you say, oh, you know, you try to make something up, now the trust of the team or the respect of the team is kind of like, I don't really know if this is the kind of guy that we want to, you know, follow.
Yeah, because then the trickle down effect, right? Like the next time you say something, they're like, does he really know what he's talking about? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always give those examples of like, I'll either say I don't know, or I'll say like, here's what I think it is. I could be completely wrong though. Granted, little less consequences than being in the military, right? Like, you know, someone says like, hey, what's the printer code? It's this. I could be wrong though, so I don't know.
And the world is run on assumptions. You can't plan without assumptions. So you have to have assumptions built in, right? And those assumptions change, and you have to be humble enough to say, hey, look, I planned this based on these assumptions. These assumptions have changed, and so therefore the plan has changed.
Yeah, I thought it was one thing. Turns out it's not. But like, let's lift and shift. You know, it's okay.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then I was going to ask you, like, you know, where do you think leaders go wrong? But I think throughout this conversation, you kind of touched on a lot of those things. You know, like a lack of humility.
It's a lack
of adaptability. You know, so again, like this is my thing, and that's it. But I think you also talked about like, where do leaders go right? You know, I think it's just not to just play the opposite of those two things, but also just having that like lifelong learner's mentality. Because if you as a leader are with that mentality, then I think that's motivation for the people you lead to be like, oh, that's something I need to still do also. You know, like he's continuing to learn, so why can't I?
Yeah, you're exactly right. One of the big things that something that I've been like kind of brewing on, and my time over at the Officer Candidate School has like fully crystallized it, is just kind of leadership idea of, you know, a two-step process. And the first step is creating a vision, right? Creating a goal that you want to take your team to. And then the second step is establish buy-in, right? So if you create a goal and you establish buy-in, now your team wants to be part of that goal. And I discovered that, funny enough, by failing to do so as a platoon leader. So I was a brand new platoon leader in Germany. And, you know, I really wanted to, you know, hey, team, let's do this, set up a whole, you know, paper full of goals. But I didn't ask anyone for any input. I didn't say, hey, platoon sergeant, hey, squad leader, what do you guys think of this? No, you know, it was the, you know, Lieutenant Lehman show, right? And I didn't get the buy-in, right? So now I understand that you might have some ideas of what you want, but unless you like reach out to your team and be like, hey, what do you think about this? You know, what if we did this, right? That generates, you know, that creates the buy-in to move yourself there, right? So I think of like creating a vision as like the GPS for your car, right? This is where we want to go. But the buy-in is like the fuel. The buy-in is the gas. If you got the buy-in, you've got the gas to bring your car there. If you don't have the buy-in, you are pushing that car, right? And so that is what OCS has really taught me. It was something I was ruminating on, and just the daily leadership lesson is something that just really crystallized that in me.
Yeah, I like that car analogy, because to you as like the leader, like you're driving the car essentially, right? But like if you don't have people helping you like fuel up that gas tank, like you're not going anywhere, you know? And I think that aligns a lot with the research related to like goal commitment. One of the ways to enhance that within an organization is to get them involved.
Yes.
Like yes, your technically the final say, right? Like whether this I like this idea, I don't like this
Mhm.
idea, but having them involved in that process makes them feel more part of that team. So, like you said, if they feel like they had a set in that goal, well, maybe
Mhm.
they're now more motivated to add fuel to that car, right? Like, oh yeah, I'll give you $20.
Absolutely.
Like, let's get there. Let's do this thing. You know?
Absolutely. I remember, just going on top of what you said, right? So, before being the company commander for Delta Company, I was a instructor for Bravo Company over at OCS, right?
Mhm.
Earned the casualty of the cycle and got the opportunity to become a company commander for Delta. And I had about a month of planning, right? So I took that month and I went all out, plan, went crazy. Showed up at Delta Company with all these plans of all these great things and realized that I was solving the problems of a different company.
Mm.
And I hadn't taken the time to understand my company,
Yeah.
who have different issues, different problems, different goals, different successes, different cadre. I was too busy trying to implant a solution for a problem that didn't exist. And that's
Yeah.
when I was like, wow, I really need to stop talking, right? And start listening. And so, like I said, it's a slow process,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
getting there.
Yeah. Every now it's like anything, right? Like some new problem comes up, you're like, oh, okay, didn't
Yeah.
prepare for that. Let's work on that one. No, but I think what you just said, like you decided to start listening,
Yeah.
and I think people, not everybody, but there's that misconception of what like a leader is. Like I need to be the biggest, baddest in the room and just like say everything so people can hear me. Which yes, I'm sure that's part of it, right? You have to start, or you have to step up in front of people and be confident, but you also have to like listen to what's going on, because you can only see so much from your level as a
Absolutely.
commander, right? You're getting a different perspective from your cadre, from your platoon leaders, just from your everyday students going through OCS, right? Like
Yep.
everybody's got different vantage points, and the more intel you have as a leader, it's going to help you make a
Yep.
more uh, effective decision at
Yeah.
the end of the day, right?
And you bring
Uh,
up a good point, right? Getting perspectives, right?
yeah.
So we do something we call leadership by walking around, right? I
Mm,
would literally just walk around and check on my candidates. I do the same thing here with my cadets. Um, I'll walk around and I'll say, "Hey, how's finals week?" Right? And they might just be like,
yeah.
"Hey, it's good," right? Sometimes it opens the door, and all of a sudden we're having all these crazy conversations about, you know, life at home, about
Yeah.
goals for the future, all this craziness that just sparked from, "Hey, how's finals going?"
Yeah.
And you wouldn't believe the amount of like deep conversations you have with these people that start off with a simple like, "Hey, how you doing?" What's going on, right? And so I think just being able to make yourself open and getting the perspective of multiple people can help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think two things that impact that, right? Like one, you're not a behind the desk leader.
Right.
If you're just sitting behind the desk, then I don't know why that I just did a thumbs up, and all of a sudden that's weird.
Cool.
Cool, nice. Oh, I didn't know that was a thing. Zoom did update before I got on here, so I guess that's one of the things. Good to know. Don't do a thumbs up on screen. Yeah, so one, like you're not a behind the desk leader, right? Because if you're sitting behind a desk all the time, you're not going to find that info. But I
Exactly.
think I think this kind of ties back into like emotional intelligence and like you talking about like what you need,
Mhm.
being able to open yourself up in front of other people. That makes
Yep.
them more likely to now open up, right? My leader can do it. I feel like this is a safe space for me to do it now,
Mhm.
you know. But I think that goes to the environment that you create as a
Yes.
leader, right?
Yes. And you want to talk about that. Like during my time as commander, I was lucky to have MRT there, such a great team. And I also had the chaplain over there was amazing,
Mm,
right? He was always on call. And I worked hard to make sure those resources of MRT, chaplain were there, right? To create that space that you said where the candidates could admit that they were struggling, right? Because
yeah,
we were trying to make them better, right?
yeah,
And so I was lucky to have good support. But I was also smart enough to say, how can we get more from these guys, right? How can we reach out and have them teach, right? Hey, if land nav is our biggest threat, how can we get MRT involved? How can we
yeah,
get the chaplain involved? How can we, you know, provide different avenues rather than just saying, oh, these guys aren't good enough or these guys aren't smart enough, right? It's like, how can we provide the foundation to get them there?
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of MRT, right? So yeah, being trained in resilience, right?
Yes.
So you've got a chance to go through that course.
Yes. Great
What
course.
resilience is, the science behind it. You got a chance to work with us as performance experts to learn
Yep.
more about mental skills training. So that leads me to this question of like, how has like learning about resilience, how to build it, how do you think that has either impacted your leadership or just
Mhm.
impacted you in general, right? Because that's what we're
Yep.
talking about here with this whole thing is how to like what sort of role does mental skills
Yep.
play? So what do you think? How has that impacted you as a leader?
Yeah. So I tell you what, the biggest lesson that I learned from Master Resilience Trainer's course is that resiliency doesn't mean that you never show weakness, right? It is not the iron first sergeant, right? Like
Mm,
I had thought, right?
yeah,
Resiliency is understanding that you are a human that has ebbs and flows, and so does everyone else, right? And so you have those good days and you have those bad days, and be able to understand that, hey, I need to take a time out, right? I need to relax a little bit, right? Because I'm not perfect. I
yeah,
am not the Iron Commander, right? I am just a normal guy that I've got my good times and I got my bad times. So if I'm having a rough time, what can I do to, hey, let's figure this out another time. uh Helps me not hold people so personal, being like,
mm,
hey, this is probably a bad day for that person. It
yeah,
doesn't mean that that person is a bad person. You know what
yeah,
I mean? And hey, I am noticing that I am starting to lash out or maybe being a little bit more sarcastic or aggressive than I would like to be. I
yeah,
probably shouldn't be talking right now. I probably should, put a little bit of distance between myself and the person I want to talk to,
yeah,
because I don't want to, treat people like that, right? So being able to
yeah.
understand that resiliency is about understanding
Mm.
that you need to take a break sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, it also ties back into what you said earlier about learning emotional intelligence. Like the first thing you did was discover more like yourself. Like, let me work on myself. What do I
Yep.
need so that I can help listen to others? So, and I think, yeah, there is this mantra that like if you are resilient, that like you don't show weakness, like nothing bothers you, right? But
Right.
like sometimes that's not the case. Yeah, so
Yeah.
just for you yourself being able to understand that by now, like how do I can now notice it in other people,
Yeah. And,
like
and in the past,
humanize what they're going through.
right. In the past, I thought that by taking a break, it meant I wasn't resilient.
Yeah.
Right? Now I understand that by taking that time, I am actually demonstrating resilience. Right?
Yep.
It like complete 180 change in my mind, where admitting that I needed a break didn't mean I was not resilient.
Yeah. Sometimes the hard choice is like giving yourself that break.
Yep.
So I have one more question for you, but I
Okay.
mean, before we get to that, just to wrap up, like talk about a lot, I think like how your leadership developed and like the importance of being able to respect other people, like, you know, be nice and just make sure like everybody's where they need to be. So having those constant check-ins with people about like, hey man, like how's it
Constant
going? You,
check-ins.
you never know what's going to happen. But I think another big thing you talked about too is like doing your own human homework on yourself, but also like how do I as a leader get others involved in this
Yep.
process? I think can help make for not just like an effective leadership style, but for an effective like work environment, whatever it is
Yes.
that you're in.
Yes.
So I appreciate you sharing all that. Now, to wrap this up, what's one like word of advice you would have for either current leaders going through it, looking to get better, or future leaders who are maybe like in your situation when you're going through ROTC? Like, what's a word of advice you would have for them?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. So I'll echo the words. I'm stealing these words right from my brigade commander back at OCS. He said to me, he's like, leadership is a laboratory,
Mm.
right? And I was like, I didn't really know what he meant by that, right?
You're like, sure,
And
okay.
yeah, yeah, right. Like, okay. And he's like, it's okay to make mistakes, right? It's okay
Mm.
to experiment, right? And to me, I was like, wow. And I was a company commander. I'd already spent all that time. And I was like, wow, it is okay to make mistakes, right? And so what I recommend, right, is looking at leadership not as being like you have to be perfect all the time, right? I think it's understanding that through failure, you learn things about yourself or about leadership that you never would have before.
Mm.
So leadership is a laboratory. And it's okay to experiment and it's okay to fail, because you are the sum, you're the sum total, not of your failures, but of the experiences that you've learned throughout your entire life.
I like that. Yeah, I like that, viewing leadership as a laboratory.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
because
opened my mind.
not every experience is or not every
Yes.
experiment is going to go right
Right.
100% of the time.
But you're a better scientist, you're a better leader because of it. Whether the
Yeah.
experiment worked or it didn't, you had a question, you ran an experiment, and now you got the results.
And at least now you know, right?
Yeah.
No left wondering. Well, cool. I like that. I like ending on that, And as we end, my dog decides to run in here and he's about to start barking. So it's a good time to stop. Well, look, I appreciate you taking the time to kind of sit with me. I know like I said, it could go 10, 15 minutes. It could go 40. We'll see what happens. And we were on the latter end. So, but no, I really appreciate that. Keep in touch as always. Good luck out there in Utah.
You bet,
Congrats on the 1-year anniversary. But yeah, it was good to talk to you, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Good to see you. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Yep. Good to see you too.
Right, so that's a wrap from Captain Matthew Lehman. Can't thank him enough for spending just a couple of minutes here with me today. Again, please subscribe, like, comment any of your takeaways, any questions you might have about what we talked about in terms of leadership. If you don't got anything for me, then have a good rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you soon.